the Madman!
Blizzard has a new offering for Hearthstone. Battle-ready decks. These battle-ready decks could get to Legend, and they're available in the Blizzard store for $20. And you can only buy one of them, and they are really good value. In fact, I used one of the decks that looks suspiciously like one of these battle-ready decks in order to climb from Apprentice 40 all the way to High Legend. As someone who's come from Magic the Gathering, I can't emphasize how astounded I am by how great a value $20 is for a deck. I did some calculations and I figured out that $1 is about equal to 100 gold, is about equal to 200 dust. And what you're getting out of here is $20 for decks full of cards that you want in your deck. 6,000 to 7,000 dust worth generally. So if 20 bucks should get you 4,000 dust worth of assorted stuff, but instead they're getting you 6,000 to 7,000 dust worth of stuff that's all very focused in a strategy in a deck that you want. I can't speak more about how great a deal that is. So truly, I do believe you can take any of these decks and get to the Legend. Some of them might be a bit easier to get to than others, so therefore I'm rating each of these decks on a power scale and on a value scale. Some of them have 4 legendaries, some of them have 3 legendaries, but ultimately the value rating is based off of what's relevant in the deck. So let's start off with Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter offers up a Death Rattle deck with Watch Posts. This might actually look like a meme deck to you. It might look weak, but it's actually tier 3. This is the type of deck for you mid-range players out there who like having the flexibility. Sometimes you're gonna be the aggressor. Sometimes you're gonna have to play it so that you're playing defense against the aggro decks. This deck just fits really squarely in the middle, and therefore it's really flexible. General plan is to use your chain of death rattles to efficiently get out of your minions, and on the very high end you have Illidari Inquisitor, who is just a machine. Changes I'd make to this deck in order to put it to the more commonly played competitive deck for, you know, a Death Rattle Demon Hunter. You'd cut Kurtrus and you'd cut his skull, and you'd put in 2 Illidari Studies, which is an excellent card in this deck. And believe me, it's not a meme. This deck definitely can get to Legend. It's better than you think it is. Druid. This is truly for the player who wants the biggest deck. They want to play the biggest stuff. It's a tier 3 deck, but it's actually still quite good. Game plan's pretty straightforward. You ramp, play your guardian animals for a big swing turn. You play survival of the fittest. You play some strongmen with the survival. You play a Carnival Clan after the survival, you win the game. Small changes that you want to do in this deck as well. Cut the Yashiraj and cut Nature Studies, and you want to put in 2 Druid of the Plains, which is a very, very good card in this deck. The Hunter deck is extremely fierce. For the player who is single-mindedly wanting to just kill your opponent, every single card of this deck is intended to do damage to the opponent's face, pretty much. Indeed, though, with a mana curve topping off at 5 mana, you just want to kill your opponent as fast as possible, and then you finish them off with the Trampling Rhino, which could be a 7/6 Trampling Rhino when you discover it with the Warsong Wrangler from your deck. The cards I'd change for this Hunter deck would definitely be to cut down all of the cards that they added in order to make the deck more expensive dust-wise, because it turns out that Face Hunter is all about the commons, the good old solid commons. So you want to remove the Trueaim Crescents and the Ace Hunter Kreen. Who needs those epics and legendaries? You want to put in Imprisoned Felmals, Piercing Shot, and Arcane Shots. The Mage deck is not one that you're used to. Instead of the Spell Mage, it's the Spell Damage Mage. Now, one possible reason for this is that Blizzard stated they didn't want to put in cards that they were going to nerf. This might be a hint that Refreshing Spring Water, which is notably absent from this deck, may be getting the look at. This list relies on getting out Egwin and then constantly adding in the +2 spell damage on other minions, and then playing a bunch of spells to hit the face. It's for the magicians out there who want to sling really powerful spells. The cards I'd cut from this deck would be Kazakus and Firebrand and Ogremancer and Wandmaker, because you want to put in fireballs. That seems really important in this deck. Apparently, the Kazakus was thought to be important enough to not put in not only Fireball, but also Refreshing Spring Water, excellent card, and Imprisoned Phoenix. Imprisoned Phoenix, another card for the spell damage theme of this deck. Paladin's got a Secret Paladin deck, and an aggressive variant of it. This type of deck is a mid-range deck, which really speaks to the players who like milking every ounce of value out of a really efficient deck. Every single card you play is just a little bit better than what your opponent's going to be able to play. People who watched my free-to-play run will note that, for a moment, I actually played this Secret Paladin deck, a little bit of a different variant, and I ran Cariel as my 4-drop instead of Kazakus, but Kazakus is fine. From this list, I would cut out Smythe, and possibly, it's a bit dependent on what you want, I would cut out the legendary McGurgle as well, so they kind of gave you 2 legendaries that you don't necessarily need. I'd also cut out the Argent Squires. And you can put in the Taelan and the Alexstrasza. Taelan fetches Alexstrasza, give that burst damage at the end. Gets the opponent down over the taunts that they may put up. And you put in Argent Protectors, just efficient base cards. Priest deck is definitely meant for the control player, the player who wants to have an answer to anything the opponent puts up and then just eventually whittle them down. This deck doesn't really have a way to win, per se, which sounds bad until you realize, well, the way to win is to make sure your opponent doesn't win. If your opponent doesn't win, then you eventually win. And to do that, there's just a bunch of removal and a bunch of healing, and you just eventually wear them out. Unfortunately, due to the current state of what's being played in the metagame, I can't really recommend this deck because it's very weak against Warlock. They just outvalue you, and even though this has a lot of anti-aggro tools, you still don't win against aggro quite as much as I would like. Cards that I would change here would be, I'd take out the 2 Holy Nova and put in 2 Holy Smite. You want that single target damage to kill off more aggressive minions. Really spicy deck that the Rogue has here. This is probably going to be the hardest deck of the 10 to play, and it's for the player who is tricky, really enjoys playing a very large amount of cards each turn, well, in particular turns, and wants to finish your opponent off with a flourish. This is the one deck that I don't think a single card should be changed at all. It's perfect just the way it is. The deck's game plan is pretty interesting. In the early game, you stall them a bit with your secrets, with some efficient removal. You try to get some stuff discounted with efficient Octobot, and then you go off with your field contact. You play your field contact, you play a bunch of spells, you play a bunch of cheap minions, you draw a bunch of cards, and eventually, depending on the matchup, you either create incredible amounts of value with Jandis Barov and then bounce Jandis Barov back in your hand. Could be Kazakus as well, but if you really want to burst down your opponent, you could play Alexstrasza and then Shadow Step Alexstrasza, then play Alexstrasza the following turn, and then play Tenwu and bounce your Alexstrasza, and then play Alexstrasza again for 1 mana. If you're playing against exactly a control deck, that is actually the common way to win. Shaman, this is probably the deck that you would see the least out of all of these classes. Shaman's just a little bit out of style at the moment, but that's not to say that this deck is bad. The idea of the deck is it's a pretty aggressive deck. Most of the damage is going to come from your Doomhammer. You equip the Doomhammer, you use Rockbiter Weapon and or Storm Strike in order to make your attack value 5, and then you can deal chunks of 10 damage to your opponent's face. That's a lot of damage. Unlike the Face Hunter, which commonly just wants to hit the face, as the Shaman, you've got to carefully judge, okay, when am I going to have to sacrifice some damage, kill some of the opponent's minions, and then actually go face after that. The cards that I think should be changed here would be the Wandmaker and the Marsh Spawns. They're a little bit too slow. I'd put in the Lightning Blooms and another Torrent. Warlock, for those of you who kept up with my free-to-play run, this deck will look very familiar. Now, I was very tempted to up the power rating on this deck, but every source I have tells me that it's a tier 3 deck. But anyways, I hit high legend with this deck, so you might just realize how important it is that you actually choose the deck that's right for you. I'm just one that's very inclined towards value, and this deck is the ultimate in value because it is the only deck that has basically a hero, and with that hero card, it's a big one, Lord Jaraxxus. You just press the button and you inevitably win by summoning 6/6s. So the entire deck is here to just slow your opponent down. Lots of board clearing, lots of killing your opponent's minions, lots of healing, and it's all for the purposes of eventually you're going to play Lord Jaraxxus, and eventually you will win by hitting that button. From here, I'd personally cut the Venomous Scorpid and the 2 Siphoned Souls, and I'd move it to what my free-to-play deck ran at the end. +2 Ogromancer, +1 Death's Head Cultist. And finally, last but definitely not least, it's the best value and power rating deck. Its power comes from the mechanic of Rush, which allows you to actually be quite flexible because minions are just always good. They're a proactive threat. But even better is if when you can use them reactively. Your opponent plays a minion, you can actually take down that minion immediately by playing a minion and attacking it. Which makes this deck quite flexible as both a deck that's just proactive as well as a deck that can respond to your opponent. As a result, this definitely fits the category of mid-range, as it has cards that both cost a very small amount of mana, all the way up to 8 mana and 9 mana, as well as cards that draw a bunch of cards. Truly, you can just get a tremendous amount of efficient value in this deck. Lots of rush synergy as well with your parade leaders and your playmakers. Truly, you can just get a tremendous amount of efficient value in this deck. The cards that are a bit flexible in this are the 29th and 30th card they've put in this deck, which is the Venomous Scorpid and the Outrider's Axe. Those could be any amounts of Outrider Axe or Shield of Honor or Stonemaul Anchor. All reasonable cards to add in. These battle ready decks are going to be a great resource for you to jump right in if you're a new or returning player. And I want to emphasize, there is no best one here. I do believe you should just pick the deck that speaks out most to you.